Give us an update on the bourse today.
The market continued its gains, riding on the back of yesterday's gains as well. Basically, bargain hunters were attracted to the deep discounts on the market after the market lost about 10% last week in reaction to the CBN's moves. Gains were broad-based, although most of the activity was focused on the banking sector, especially in banks, of course, that have been cleared by the CBN.
Well, talking about the banking sector, Sterling Bank, it was like a surprise almost that they passed their first CBN audit. Take us through the fundamentals of Sterling Bank.
Well, Sterling Bank, it appears for many investors, came as a bit of a surprise. Basically because of the size of the bank. I guess investors were pricing in the possibility that the bank, might have significant problems, even questioning its existence as a going concern going forward. But it really wasn't the case, really, because the bank makes a lot of its income, looking at its balance sheet, from non-interest areas. If you look at its 2008 figures, for instance, its net interest income was about 10 billion, whereas its non-interest income was about 13 billion. And looking at the movements in its balance sheet in terms of its assets, its cash and short-term positions, for instance, were up about 100%. And these constituted the bulk of its assets, as against its loan portfolio, which was just up about 42%. So what is clear is that the growth in its assets was skewed more towards non-loan assets. And that basically helped the bank survive, what the sort of defaults we've seen in the sector that have really scourged a lot of operators within the sector. Looking at its valuation, it was trading at about just over 2 times its historical earnings at the point of the CBN's disclosure. So it's clear that investors were pricing in a much more negative outlook for the bank. This hasn't been the case, and so there's a lot more investor interest in the bank.
All right, let's move on to Custodian and Allied Insurance PLC. They came out with results. We're looking at a scenario where gross premium growth is up. It's up about 42.79%. Why are so many people joining the insurance sector?
Well, Custodian and Allied has been one of the stronger players within the sector. A lot of its performance has been broad-based. It's a very big player in the motor insurance sector. But more importantly, a lot of the growth has been from its oil and gas business, given that it's one of the few players within the industry that has an oil and gas treaty. What that has helped the insurance company do, basically, is to leverage on bigger balance sheets from, its international partner. Going forward, of course, the local content policy, which, retains about 45% of coverage, and with local insurance institutions, will bode well for its growth, into the medium term. It's very attractively valued. The quality of its earnings is, right up there, as it's able to sustain pretty attractive dividend payments. So it's come to be one of, the more interesting players for investors in the industry.
Well, their premium generation is expected to increase as well. So what is their sales strategy going forward?
Well, a lot of it has been by basic physical expansion. The company at the end of 2008 expressed its desire to double its branches, for instance, looking at areas like the north. Even internationally, we're talking about expansion into like Senegal. So both on the local and sort of African fronts, the company has engaged aggressively in expanding. Also, its business lines, because of the attractiveness of its proposition, basically, have boded very well for it, as it's been able to grow organically, basically, its income.
And do you think they can sustain their profit levels going forward?
Well, we think they will be able to, because, the anchor of its growth strategy in the oil and gas business is not limited by its balance sheet, given that it has an oil treaty, which allows it to leverage on, a much larger balance sheet of its international partner. Also, as I said before, the local content drive, which hasn't quite been implemented to the book. The retention of about 45% of coverage locally. I mean, this is huge in terms of where the industry, in terms of the slack for the industry to catch up with. And we expect this to sustain its growth, at least into the medium term, and if not into the long term.